What happens when a power-tripping cop picks the wrong black woman to humiliate in public, only to realize she is the new police captain who now controls his entire career. Tonight, inside a crowded bar, one man's arrogance is about to collide with a truth he never saw coming. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The neon lights of Rusty Nail Bar flickered softly against the dark Texas evening, casting streaks of red and blue across the polished wood floors, almost like distant sirens frozen in time. It was the kind of place where conversation stayed low, laughter came easy, and badges, both real and imagined, carried more weight than the law itself. Behind the counter, Luis wiped down glasses with slow, practiced movements, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the door as it creaked open. Angela Brooks stepped inside without drawing attention. Her heels made a quiet, steady rhythm against the floor, measured and unhurried. She wore a simple navy blouse, sleeves rolled just enough to show control without effort, paired with dark jeans and a leather bag slung over her shoulder. To anyone watching, she was just another traveler, someone passing through, someone forgettable. But there was something in the way she moved. Not stiff, not defensive, just deliberate. Like every step had already been considered long before she took it. She paused for a brief second, letting her eyes adjust to the dim interior, scanning the room with a calm that didn't match the noise around her. Groups of men clustered around high tables, a pool game dragged on in the back, and near the far corner, a pair of uniformed officers leaned into their drinks, voices loud, laughter sharper than necessary. Angela chose a seat at the bar, 2 stools down from an empty space, placing her bag gently at her side. "Just water," she said, her voice even, almost quiet enough to disappear into the hum of the room. Luis nodded, offering a polite smile, though his gaze lingered a second longer than usual, as if he sensed something beneath the surface he could not quite name. As Angela wrapped her fingers around the glass, condensation gathering under her touch, she allowed herself a small breath. It had been a long day, a new city, a new command, a new set of eyes that would soon be watching her every move. But tonight, she wasn't here as captain. Not yet. Tonight, she was just another face in the crowd. Across the room, Officer Derek Shaw leaned back in his chair, the legs scraping faintly against the floor as he stretched, his badge catching the bar's low light. His gaze drifted lazily at first, scanning the room out of habit more than purpose. Then it stopped, locked, focused. Something about Angela didn't sit right with him. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way she didn't look around nervously like others did. Maybe it was the way she sat there, composed, untouched by the atmosphere that usually bent people into place. Derek's jaw tightened slightly as he took a slow sip from his glass, eyes narrowing just enough to sharpen his curiosity into suspicion. He leaned toward his partner, muttering something under his breath, never breaking eye contact. To him, she wasn't just a woman at the bar anymore. She was a question, and Derek Shaw had built his entire sense of authority on the belief that every question had an answer he could control. What he didn't realize, what no one in that room could see, was that the woman he had just marked as a target was about to become the most important name in his entire chain of command. And tonight, he was about to make the worst mistake of his career. Officer Derek Shaw did not rush. Men like him never did. They let the moment stretch, let the tension settle like dust before stepping in, because control, to him, was not about speed, it was about presence. He set his glass down with a dull thud, the condensation ring left behind spreading slowly across the wood, and rose from his seat with a confidence that bordered on theatrical. His partner muttered something under his breath, a half-amused warning, but Derek waved it off without looking. His attention was locked, unwavering. Each step toward the bar carried a deliberate weight, his boots striking the floor just loud enough to be noticed. Conversations nearby began to taper off, not completely, but enough for people to sense the shift. Angela did not turn. She had already tracked him in the mirror behind the bar, her eyes catching his reflection the moment he stood. She could read the posture, the squared shoulders, the slight flare of the elbows that signaled ownership of space. She had seen it before, too many times to count. The only difference tonight was that she had no intention of playing along. Derek stopped just behind her, close enough that the edge of his shadow stretched across her glass. "You new around here?" he asked, his voice carrying a casual tone that did not quite mask the edge beneath it. Angela took a slow sip of water before responding, setting the glass down carefully. "Passing through," she said, her tone neutral, neither inviting nor defensive. That should have been the end of it. For most people, it would have been, but Derek's lips curled slightly, not into a smile, but into something sharper, something that fed on resistance. He shifted to the empty stool beside her without asking, dragging it just a fraction louder than necessary as he Saturday funny. He continued, leaning an elbow onto the bar, angling his body toward her in a way that felt less like conversation and more like containment. "I tend to know who belongs here." Angela turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. Her expression did not change, but there was a stillness behind her eyes that made something in Derek's chest tighten for a brief, unfamiliar second. He ignored it. "And what exactly does that mean?" she asked. Her voice remained even, but there was a precision in the way she spoke now, each word placed carefully like pieces on a board. Derek let out a quiet breath through his nose, glancing around as if inviting the room to share in the moment. A couple of nearby patrons leaned subtly closer, pretending not to listen. "It means," he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound controlled, "people who come in here usually have a reason. Friends, family, work." His eyes flicked down to her bag, then back to her face. "You don't look like any of those." Angela's fingers rested lightly against the side of her glass, unmoving. "I didn't realize this was a private establishment," she replied. Derek's jaw flexed. The bartender, Luis, paused mid-wipe, his eyes darting between them. The tension was no longer subtle now. It had a shape, a direction. Derek leaned closer, his presence pressing into her space without quite touching. "It is when I say it is," he said, the casual tone slipping just enough to reveal the authority he believed he carried. Angela held his gaze, unblinking. She did not shift away. She did not raise her voice. That, more than anything, unsettled him. Around them, the room had grown quieter, the earlier laughter fading into a low murmur as more eyes turned in their direction. Derek straightened slightly, his hand resting near his belt, not reaching, just hovering, a silent reminder of the badge clipped there. "So, I'll ask you again," he said, his voice firmer now, each word landing heavier than the last. "What exactly are you doing here?" Angela tilted her head just a fraction, as if considering the question, though her answer came without hesitation. "Sitting," she said simply. The word hung in the air longer than it should have. A couple of people exchanged glances. Someone let out a quiet breath that might have been a suppressed laugh. Derek's expression hardened instantly, the faint amusement gone, replaced by something colder, more rigid. He did not like being answered like that. Not in front of people. Not by her. He pushed himself up from the stool, the legs scraping sharply against the floor this time, the sound cutting through the room like a signal. "All right," he said, louder now, making sure others could hear. "We're going to do this the easy way or the hard way." Angela did not move, but the air between them had shifted completely, and Derek, fueled by the attention now fixed on him, had already decided which way this was going to go. The words hung between them, heavy and deliberate, and Derek Shaw took that stillness as defiance. His lips pressed into a thin line as he stepped closer, his presence no longer just implied but imposed. "Stand up," he said, his voice sharp now, cutting through the low murmur of the bar. Angela did not react immediately. She glanced down at her glass, her fingers brushing lightly against the rim as if considering whether to take another sip. The pause, subtle as it was, felt intentional, and it scraped against Derek's patience like sandpaper. "I said stand up," he repeated, louder this time, his tone drawing more attention as nearby conversations faded completely. Chairs shifted, bodies angled, eyes locked onto the unfolding scene. Angela exhaled slowly, then turned her head to look at him fully. "Am I being detained?" she asked, her voice steady, measured, and entirely unshaken. The question landed differently than anything else she had said. It carried weight, familiarity, a quiet understanding of rules Derek was used to bending. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, quickly buried. "You are being asked to cooperate," he shot back, emphasizing each word like it carried legal authority. Angela's gaze did not waver. "That is not the same thing," she replied. A faint ripple moved through the onlookers. Someone near the back shifted uncomfortably. Louise set a glass down a little too hard behind the counter, the sound snapping in the silence. Derek's posture stiffened, his shoulders tightening as the balance of the moment began to tilt in a direction he did not control. He reached forward, not fast, but firm, placing his hand on the back of Angela's stool and pulling it just enough to disrupt her balance. The movement forced her to steady herself, her hand pressing briefly against the bar. "You do not get to debate me," Derek said, his voice dropping into something colder, more dangerous. "Not here." Angela adjusted her position without haste, regaining her balance with a quiet precision that made the gesture feel almost insignificant. She did not look rattled. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she placed both hands flat on the bar, her posture straightening slightly, her presence anchoring itself in the space Derek was trying to dominate. "Then maybe you should be very clear about what you are doing," she said. The calmness in her tone was not passive. It was deliberate, controlled, and it pressed against Derek's authority in a way that felt far more challenging than shouting ever could. His jaw tightened, the muscle along his cheek flexing as he leaned in closer, invading her space completely now. "I'm telling you to leave," he said, his voice carrying again, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are causing a disturbance." A faint, incredulous breath escaped from someone in the crowd. Angela's eyes moved briefly, scanning the room, taking in the faces, the tension, the unspoken awareness that nothing she had done justified what was happening. Then she looked back at him. "By sitting quietly?" she asked. Derek's patience snapped. The attention, the quiet resistance, the subtle shift in the room's energy, it all fed into the tightening coil. Inside him, without warning, he reached for her arm, his grip firm as his fingers wrapped around her wrist. "That is enough," he said, pulling her slightly off the stool. The movement was controlled, but unmistakably forceful, a clear escalation that sent a ripple through the bar. Angela allowed herself to rise, not resisting, but not assisting either. Her body moved with the pull, her feet finding the floor as she stood. Yet even now, even with his hand gripping her, she did not look at him with fear. She looked at him with something else entirely. Assessment. Derek felt it, even if he could not name it, and it irritated him more than anything else. Around them, the room had gone completely still. Every eye was watching now. Every breath felt held. And Derek, standing there with his hand still wrapped around her wrist, had already crossed a line he could not see, but one he was about to pay for. The moment stretched tight as a wire, and instead of releasing his grip, Derek tightened it. His fingers pressed harder around Angela's wrist, not enough to injure, but enough to assert control, to remind everyone watching exactly who he believed held the authority in that room. "You think this is a game?" he said, his voice louder now, sharper, cutting through the silence that had settled over the bar. Angela's posture remained upright, her shoulders relaxed, her balance centered despite the tension in his hold. She did not pull away. She did not resist. She simply looked at him, her expression unchanged, as if his grip meant far less than he intended it to. That calm, that refusal to react, only fed the irritation simmering beneath Derek's surface. "Let go of me," Angela said, not raised, not pleading, just clear. The simplicity of it drew a few uneasy glances from the crowd. Derek let out a breath through his nose, something close to a scoff. "Or what?" he shot back, tilting his head slightly, inviting a reaction he clearly expected. When none came, his lips curled in frustration. Without warning, he released her wrist, only to grab the back of her stool and shove it aside with unnecessary force. The legs scraped loudly against the floor before tipping over with a sharp clatter that echoed through the bar. A few people flinched. The sound broke whatever fragile neutrality had remained. "You are done sitting here," Derek announced, sweeping his arm toward the exit as if clearing space. "Out. Now." Angela glanced briefly at the fallen stool, then back at him. Her eyes did not flash with anger. They did not narrow in fear. They simply observed, steady and unshaken, taking in every detail of what he had just done. That lack of visible reaction, again, felt like resistance in its own right. Derek stepped closer, closing the gap entirely, his shoulder nearly brushing hers. "Do not make me repeat myself," he added, his voice dropping into something more controlled, but no less aggressive. Behind the bar, Luis shifted uneasily, his hand hovering near the edge of the counter as if considering stepping in, then thinking better of it. The other officer across the room leaned back slightly, watching now with a quiet tension, but offering no interference. Derek reached past Angela toward her glass, his fingers curling around it without asking. He lifted it, glancing at the clear liquid inside, then let out a dismissive breath. "You come in here, sit like you own the place, and expect no one to notice?" he muttered. Before anyone could react, he tipped the glass forward, letting the water spill, not onto the floor, but directly across the front of Angela's blouse. The liquid spread quickly, darkening the fabric, dripping in thin lines down toward the edge of the bar. A collective intake of breath moved through the room. The act was not violent, but it was deliberate, public, humiliating. Derek set the empty glass down with a soft tap, as if the gesture itself had been insignificant. "Now you have a reason to leave," he said, a faint edge of satisfaction in his tone. Angela looked down briefly at the damp fabric, then lifted her gaze back to him. Not a flicker of panic, not a raised voice, just that same measured stillness, now carrying something deeper beneath it. The room felt different now, heavier, as if everyone present understood that something irreversible had just occurred. And Derek, standing there with a sense of control swelling in his chest, had no idea that this moment, this exact act, had just sealed his fate. The water dripped steadily from the edge of Angela's blouse, tapping softly against the wood beneath her, each drop marking the silence that followed Derek's action. No one laughed this time. The earlier tension had shifted into something heavier, something that pressed down on the room like a storm waiting to break. Derek noticed it, of course. He saw the way people avoided eye contact, the way even his partner leaned back just slightly, no longer sharing in the moment. But instead of pulling back, he leaned further in. His pride had already committed him. "Still standing there?" Derek said, his tone sharper now, almost daring her to react. "You want to push this further?" Angela reached up calmly, brushing a strand of damp fabric away from her arm. Her movements were unhurried, precise, as if she were adjusting to rain rather than humiliation. When she spoke, her voice remained level. "You are making a mistake," she said. Not loud, not dramatic, just certain. Derek let out a breath that bordered on a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "No," he replied, stepping even closer, his presence now fully invasive. "The mistake was you walking in here, thinking you could do whatever you want." His hand moved again, this time not to her wrist, but to her upper arm, gripping firmly as he turned her slightly toward the door. The motion was controlled, but unmistakably forceful, a clear escalation from intimidation to physical enforcement. Angela allowed the movement, her feet shifting with his push, but her posture remained steady, her balance never breaking. "I am not resisting," she stated clearly, her words carrying just enough volume to reach the ears of those watching. That sentence, simple as it was, caused a subtle ripple through the crowd. Phones began to appear, held low but angled just enough to capture what was happening. Derek noticed too late. His grip tightened slightly, not out of necessity, but out of irritation. "You think saying that changes anything?" he snapped. "You are being removed." He guided. No, forced her another step forward, his hand pressing against her arm as if steering her like an object rather than a person. The scrape of her shoe against the floor echoed louder than it should have. Angela turned her head just enough to look at him again. There was no fear in her expression. No panique. Only a quiet, focused attention that seemed to study him, to memorize him. On what grounds? She asked. Derek's jaw clenched. The question, again, struck deeper than it should have. It was not defiance, in tone, but in substance. It demanded justification. And Derek, standing in front of an audience, was not about to admit he did not have one. Disorderly conduct, he said quickly, the words coming out more forcefully than intended. Refusal to comply. Angela's eyes held his. Neither of those are accurate, she replied. That was it. The last thread snapped. Derek's hand dropped from her arm to his belt, pulling free a pair of handcuffs with a practice motion. The metallic glint caught the low light of the bar, drawing immediate attention. A sharp murmur spread through the room. Luis froze behind the counter, his grip tightening around the cloth in his hand. Derek stepped behind Angela, reaching for her wrists without hesitation. Turn around, he ordered, his voice loud, authoritative, leaving no room for interpretation. Angela did not resist as he guided her arms back, her movements controlled, deliberate, almost cooperative, but not submissive. The difference was subtle, but it was there. The cuffs closed around her wrists with a firm, unmistakable finality. The sound echoed in the silence like a verdict passed too soon. Derek straightened, his chest rising slightly as he looked out at the room, as if expecting validation, expecting agreement. But what he saw instead were faces, quiet, watchful, uncertain. And at the center of it all stood Angela Brooks, restrained but unshaken, her calm now carrying something far more dangerous than anger. It carried inevitability, and Derek, blinded by his own authority, had just taken his final step beyond the point of return. The metal cuffs rested cold and unyielding around Angela's wrists, the faint pressure of them a constant reminder of the line Derek had just crossed. For a moment, neither of them moved. The bar remained suspended in silence, every eye fixed on the scene as if the air itself had thickened around them. Derek adjusted his stance behind her, one hand still hovering near her arm, the other resting confidently on his belt. He exhaled slowly, regaining the composure he believed defined him. "All right," he said, his voice settling into a procedural tone, louder than necessary, as if narrating the situation for an invisible audience. "You're being detained for disorderly conduct and failure to comply with a lawful order." The words sounded official, rehearsed, but beneath them was something less stable, a need to justify what had already been done. Angela stood, still, her posture upright despite the restraints, her gaze forward. The damp fabric of her blouse had begun to cool against her skin, but she did not acknowledge it. Instead, she listened, truly listened. Derek reached for his radio, pressing the button with his thumb. "Dispatch, this is Shaw," he began, his tone crisp. "I have one female in custody at Rusty Nail Bar. Requesting transport." A pause. The faint crackle of static answered him. Around the room, the subtle glow of phone screens reflected off faces, capturing every second. Derek lowered the radio slightly, glancing at the crowd with a faint look of annoyance, as if their presence was an inconvenience rather than a witness. "You should have just walked out," he muttered under his breath, leaning slightly closer to Angela. "Would have saved you a lot of trouble." That was when Angela finally spoke again. Her voice cut cleanly through the silence, calm, but carrying a weight that felt different now, heavier, more deliberate. "Officer Shaw," she said, using his name for the first time. That alone made him pause, just for a fraction of a second. His brow furrowed slightly. He did not remember giving it. Angela continued, her tone measured, each word placed with precision. "You still have a chance to correct this." The phrasing was careful. Not a plea, not a threat, a statement. Derek's lips twitched, a faint, incredulous smile forming as he shook his head slightly. "Correct what?" he replied, his voice edged with disbelief. "You're the one causing a scene." Angela turned her head just enough to glance over her shoulder, meeting his eyes despite the angle. There was something in her gaze now, something unmistakable. Not anger, not fear, authority. "You have not verified my identity," she said. "You have not stated a valid cause, and you are escalating a situation you do not understand." The words landed with quiet force, each one deliberate, each one offering him a narrow path back. A final exit. Derek let out a short breath, something between a scoff and a laugh, stepping back half a pace as if to take in the absurdity of what she was suggesting. "Oh, I understand just fine," he said, his voice rising again, reclaiming the room. "I understand that you think you are smarter than everyone else in here." He gestured loosely toward the crowd, then back to her. "But here is the thing. You are not in charge." Angela's gaze did not shift. "That is where you are wrong," she replied quietly. For a split second, the room seemed to hold its breath again. Derek's expression hardened immediately, the faint smile disappearing as irritation snapped back into place. He took a step forward, closing the distance he had just created, his presence once again pressing in. "You know what?" he said, his tone sharper now, final. "I'm done with this." He reached for her arm again, gripping firmly, preparing to move her toward the door. "You can explain all of that down at the station." It was the moment, the last opportunity to stop, to reconsider, to step back. And Derek Shaw, with full confidence, chose to push forward instead, sealing his decision with the same certainty that had guided every mistake leading up to this point. The moment Derek's hand tightened around Angela's arm to move her forward, something shifted. Not in the room, not in the crowd, but in her. She stopped, not with resistance, not with force, but with a stillness so absolute it broke the motion entirely. His grip remained, but her body no longer followed. It was as if he had tried to move something rooted far deeper than he understood. "Take your hand off me," Angela said quietly. There was no rise in volume, no sharpness, yet the words carried a weight that landed differently this time. Derek felt it before he processed it. A subtle hesitation crept into his fingers, a flicker of uncertainty that did not belong to him. He frowned, tightening his grip instinctively. "We are done talking," he said, though the certainty in his voice had thinned, stretched just enough to reveal the crack beneath it. Angela turned her head fully now, meeting his eyes without obstruction. Up close, there was something undeniable in her gaze, something that did not match the situation he believed he controlled. "No," she replied. "You are." The words did not sound like defiance. They sounded like conclusion. Before Derek could respond, Angela shifted her wrists slightly within the cuffs, not to break free, but to reposition. "You're going to call your watch commander," she continued, her tone precise, each word measured. "Right now." Derek blinked, caught off guard by the directive. For the first time, he did not immediately respond. The command had not been loud, but it carried the unmistakable cadence of authority. Familiar, practiced, ingrained. "You do not give me orders," he said finally, though the edge of irritation had been replaced by something less stable. Angela held his gaze. "Then you're going to listen very carefully," she said. A pause. The room felt suspended again, every person present leaning into the silence without realizing it. "My name is Captain Angela Brooks." The words landed clean. No emphasis. No hesitation. Just fact. Derek's expression did not change at first. It was as if his mind rejected the information outright, searching for somewhere to place it that made sense. "That is not possible," he said quickly, almost reflexively, shaking his head once as if to dismiss it. But Angela did not look away. "Effective tomorrow morning, I assume command of this precinct," she continued, her voice steady, unwavering. "Your precinct." The air in the room seemed to collapse inward. Derek's grip loosened, not by choice but by instinct. His fingers slipped from her arm, hovering uncertainly in the space where control had been just seconds before. "No," he repeated, softer this time, the certainty gone. His eyes searched her face, looking for something, anything, that would confirm this was a bluff, a lie, a misunderstanding. But there was nothing there except composure. Recognition began to creep in, slow and undeniable. The name, the transfer order, the briefing he had half listened to days ago. A new captain, Angela Brooks. His stomach tightened sharply, the realization hitting not all at once, but in waves, each one stripping away another layer of certainty he had built his actions on. "You are making a mistake," Angela said again. But now the words were not a warning. They were a statement of record. Derek's hand dropped fully to his side. His shoulders, once squared with confidence, seemed to lose their structure, the tension shifting into something rigid, unnatural. Around them, the crowd remained silent, but the energy had changed completely. Phones were no longer just recording, they were documenting, witnessing. Derek swallowed, his throat suddenly dry, his mind racing for something to say, something to fix this, to reverse it. But there was nothing, because the moment he had been offered to step back had already passed. And now, standing in front of the woman he had just humiliated, restrained, and publicly degraded, Derek Shaw finally understood the truth. He had not just made a mistake. He had destroyed himself. For a long, suspended second, no one moved. Derek's hand hung in the air where authority had once lived, now empty, uncertain. The weight of Angela's words settled over him, pressing down with a force that stripped away every ounce of confidence he had carried into this moment. Then reality rushed back and all at once. "Take them off." The voice came from across the room, sharp, commanding, and unmistakably official. Derek turned, his movements slower now, almost mechanical. Standing near the entrance was Sergeant Cole Ramirez, his expression rigid, eyes locked directly on Derek with a severity that needed no explanation. He had arrived mid-scene, but he had seen enough, heard enough, and more importantly, he knew exactly who Angela Brooks was. "Now," Ramirez added, stepping forward, his presence cutting through the room like a blade. Derek's fingers fumbled slightly as he reached for the handcuffs. The same hands that had moved with practiced confidence minutes ago now felt unfamiliar, clumsy. He swallowed, his throat tight, and stepped behind Angela once more. But this time there was no control in the motion. Only urgency. Only damage control that had already come too late. The cuffs clicked open, the sound far quieter than when they had closed, but somehow heavier. Angela brought her hands forward slowly, rubbing her wrists once, not out of pain, but as if resetting something. She did not rush. She did not react. She simply turned. When she faced Derek again, the dynamic between them had completely reversed. He could not hold her gaze now. His eyes flickered downward, then away, searching for somewhere to land that was not directly in front of the consequence he had created. "Captain," Ramirez said, his tone shifting instantly as he addressed Angela. Respectful, controlled. The word echoed in the room, solidifying the reality for anyone who had still doubted. Angela gave a slight nod, acknowledging him, then looked back at Derek. Silence followed. It was not empty. It was judgment. Derek straightened instinctively, his posture attempting to rebuild itself out of habit, but the effort only made the cracks more visible. His breathing had changed, uneven now, his jaw tight, not with arrogance, but with the dawning understanding of what this meant. "Officer Shaw," Angela said, her voice calm, measured, and now undeniably authoritative. "You will remove your badge." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Derek froze. For a brief moment, he did not move, as if his mind had not fully caught up with the instruction. Around them, the room remained silent, every witness locked into the moment. "Now," Angela repeated, her tone unchanged. Derek's hand moved slowly to his chest, fingers brushing against the metal that had defined his identity for years. He hesitated, just for a second, then he unclipped it. The small metallic sound, as it came free, seemed to echo far louder than it should have. He held it there, in his hand, staring at it, as if it might somehow anchor him back to what he had been moments ago. It did not. "Place it on the bar," Angela instructed. Derek stepped forward, each movement heavy, deliberate, stripped of the confidence he once carried so easily. He set the badge down. The sound it made against the wood was final. Behind him, Ramirez spoke into his radio, his voice steady. Internal Affairs is being notified. Officer Shaw is relieved of duty effective immediately. The words hung in the air, official, irreversible. Derek's shoulders dropped, the structure of his authority collapsing completely. He did not argue. He did not protest. There was nothing left to say. Around him, the same eyes that had watched him exert power now watched him lose it. And Angela Brooks, standing composed and unwavering, had not raised her voice once. She had not fought him. She had not needed to, because in the end, the truth had done all the work for her, and justice, quiet and absolute, had taken its place. The weight of the moment did not disappear all at once. It lingered, settling into the walls of the rusty nail bar like a memory that would not easily fade. Officer Derek Shaw stood motionless where he had placed his badge, his hands still hovering just above the counter, as if unsure what to do without it. The room that had once bent around his presence now seemed to move past him, conversation slowly beginning to return in low, cautious tones, no longer centered on him, no longer controlled by him. Sergeant Ramirez remained near the entrance, speaking quietly into his radio, coordinating the next steps with calm efficiency. There was no urgency now, only process, the kind that followed truth. Angela Brooks did not rush to fill the silence. She stood where she was for a moment longer, her posture composed, her expression steady, allowing the reality of what had happened to settle, not just for Derek, but for everyone who had witnessed it. Then, with quiet precision, she reached for a napkin from the bar and dabbed lightly at the damp fabric of her blouse. The gesture was simple, almost ordinary, yet it carried a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with everything that had come before. Luis stepped forward carefully, placing a fresh glass of water on the counter in front of her without a word. His hands were steady, but his eyes held a new awareness, a respect that had not been there when she first walked in. Angela gave him a small nod, accepting the gesture, her fingers brushing the edge of the glass. Around the room, people began to shift, some lowering their phones, others exchanging glances that spoke more than words ever could. The tension that had gripped the space was loosening, replaced by something calmer, something grounded. Derek finally stepped back from the bar, his shoulders lowered, his movements subdued. He did not look at anyone as he moved toward the side, guided quietly by another officer who had arrived during the aftermath. There was no resistance, no argument, only the heavy silence of consequence. Angela watched him for a brief moment, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a measured acknowledgement of what had been done and what would follow. Then she turned away. The shift was subtle but final. She picked up her bag, adjusting the strap over her shoulder, her movements once again deliberate, controlled. As she stepped away from the bar, the path in front of her cleared without instruction, people instinctively moving aside, not out of fear, but out of respect. The same room that had watched her be diminished now bore witness to her restoration. At the door, Angela paused for just a second, her hand resting lightly on the handle. The neon lights outside cast a softer glow now, the night air waiting beyond. She did not look back. She did not need to. The message had already been delivered, not through force, not through volume, but through truth. She stepped out into the night, the door closing quietly behind her, leaving the bar, and everything that had happened inside it settling into stillness once more. And as the quiet returned, it carried with it a simple, undeniable clarity. Power, when real, does not need a shout, and justice, when it arrives, speaks for itself. What makes this story linger is not just the fall of man who misused his authority, but the quiet precision with which that authority was dismantled. Derek Shaw did not collapse because someone stronger overpowered him. He collapsed because he revealed, step by step, that his power depended entirely on being unquestioned. The moment someone stood still, spoke clearly, and refused to bend without raising their voice, his entire structure began to unravel. Angela Brooks did not win through confrontation. She won through restraint. She allowed the truth to surface on its own, And in doing so, she exposed something deeper than misconduct. She exposed how fragile borrowed power becomes when it is separated from discipline, respect, and accountability. There is something deeply human in that unraveling. When ego replaces responsibility, authority stops being a duty and becomes a performance. And performances always fail under real scrutiny. What remains, in the end, is not who had the louder voice, but who stood on something real. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.